Hello the internet, hello world, hello people who are fans of the Supreme Court. Well, congratulations. Congratulations on so many levels. First of all, you've got through all the rubbish. You've got through Congress, and Congress is horrible. So congratulations on that. Congratulations, we're nearly at the end. We get through the Supreme Court, and that's pretty much it. We've got a bit of a wash-up on the Constitution, but that's easy. But congratulations on the third point. This is the fun bit. Now, maybe I'm just weird, but I really do enjoy the Supreme Court, and these are the things we're going to be looking at, and with any luck, if I get this right, we'll be able to get through this particular bit in this presentation, but that's only if I shut up and get on with it. So, definitions and structures, there's 9 of them. How do they get there? Let's start off with the Constitution. Let's go back and look at the Constitution. There you go. Pause, read that. It's not really that interesting. What is interesting is this. Where is the judicial review? Go back. Where's judicial review? It's not there. So what does that tell us? It tells us immediately that there is nothing in the Constitution about judicial review, and that makes it kind of problematic. Judicial review was assumed by the court in the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. So this tells us a couple of important things. First of all, this is extra-constitutional and therefore slightly dubious. The other important thing on this slide is this. This is how you present cases. The key thing here, and this will enable you to distinguish yourself from people who haven't been taught properly, is that a court case is cited thus. You have both of the parties and the date. And if you're typing, it's nice and easy because you can use italics. If you are not typing, then you underline the first bit, and again, you have that date. So, judicial review, an assumed right of the court, nothing in the Constitution about it, they just decided it was probably something they should do, and that's why we have the Supreme Court and judicial review. Fascinating stuff. Right, let's move on with the mechanical bit. There are 9 justices, 1 chief. They're appointed for life, subject to good behaviour. Nothing in the Constitution about the numbers. It's just kind of settled at 9, and everyone's happy with that. We know this because in 1937, FDR was getting well cheesed off with the Supreme Court and then playing awkward games with his New Deal measures, and so he threatened to expand the court. So anyone who thinks that the Supreme Court is not a political entity, here's exhibit number 1. They backed down when FDR started to bully them. So anyway, this was the switch in time that saved 9. The Supreme Court changed its position on the constitutionality of FDR's package of policies, and we are still at 9. They're appointed by the president, first to the bench as an associate justice, and then potentially to the chair. So you've got 8 associates and 1 chair. They're approved by the Senate. That's a simple majority. It goes to the committee first and then to the whole chamber. And the rules were changed a couple of years ago to eliminate the filibuster, so hooray for democracy. The Roberts Court. How do we get to the Roberts Court? Here they are. And we've talked an awful lot about Ginsburg and how she's obviously probably the next to go, and why she has and why she hasn't gone. But there we go. And we know that the court is a 4-1-4 split. We have got 4 progressives and 1 swing, and that's this one here. Now, he is officially swing. He's probably about 40-60 progressive to conservative. He tends to swing slightly more conservative than progressive. But we'll talk about that a little later, but without doubt the single most important man in America. How do we get there? Well, this is where we started. We started with the Rehnquist Court, and I've just picked 2000 because it seemed reasonable, and we were 4-2-3. So we've got our progressives on this side, our conservatives on this side, and our swingers in the middle. So what happens next is very, very, very important. We move forward to 2005. In 2005, O'Connor decides she's had enough, so off she goes. This leaves Bush to make an appointment, and Bush appoints Robert. But before he can actually take up that seat, Rehnquist throws a 7, and he joins the Quorum Invisibile, creating another gap, and also, quite significantly, a gap at in the box seat as the chair of the Supreme Court. Bush 43 looks at this and decides the best man for the job is the bloke he's just appointed. So we wind up with Roberts going over there, and we move to the Roberts Court. This, of course, creates another vacancy on the court, so Bush is an extremely lucky little boy, and he tries to appoint Myers. That doesn't work, and so instead he appoints Samuel Alito. But of course, the problem here is that Alito is not a swing justice. No, he is a solid conservative. So we'll push him over there and we'll move Kennedy back into the middle. And so we've gone from 4 to 3 to 4, 1, 4. But of course, you and I all know, we both know rather, that Kennedy tends to swing in that direction rather than in that direction. Although he has from time to time demonstrated some liberal traits. Now, there are a couple more appointments that you need to know about, but critically, that's it. The balance of the court does not shift. What happens next is that Souter decides he's had enough, and so we replace him, or rather, Obama this time replaces him with Sotomayor. Next up is John Paul Stevens. He decides it's time for him to give it a break, and he is replaced by Eleanor Kagan. And this is where we are. We're still 4-1-4, and Kennedy still holds the swing vote. He still tends to go more in that direction than he does in that direction. And yeah, there we go. So, a political court. Let's make that clear right from the very, very start. The Supreme Court is a political body, and we can see that when we look at these problematic appointments. Very few really get challenged. The significant ones that you need to know about, are Robert Bork. He was an intellectual leviathan by all accounts, but he was quite a conservative. He was really quite strong conservative, and he was rejected by a Senate who thought he was too divisive. Ginsburg withdrew after he admitted having smoked pot at university. Ginsburg, of course, was a last-minute replacement for Bork, so Reagan was really pulling them out of the thin air at that point. Next up is Clarence Thomas. This is Bush 41. And he came in and had a right old battle. It was a really filthy battle. He was accused of being too conservative. He was also accused of sexual harassment. Those of you who've done Oleana in English literature will remember that particular story about a judge accused, or a professor, I think it was, accused of sexual harassment. Well, that was based on Thomas. But anyway, he scraped through 52 to 48. And we've already mentioned Myers. She was perceived to be incompetent by Democrats and Republicans alike, and insufficiently conservative as well for the Republicans. She withdrew, and she was replaced by the very reliable Alito. So why he didn't appoint him in the first instance, I do not know. So anyway, withdrew, appointed, withdrew, rejected. And those four will give you all of the information and all of the evidence you really need to answer any question on problematic appointments. But remember, these are political appointments. And what that means is that judicial neutrality is actually a bit of a joke. The Supreme Court can only tend towards neutrality. At any given time, it's going to exercise a bias either towards the progressive side or towards the conservative side. And historically, certainly over the period that you're going to be looking at, we have tended to have this progressive bias. There's tended to be more progressive judges than there have been conservative judges. And the reason for that is very, very simple. It's that the conservative presidents keep cocking up. We've looked at this before, but it's worth looking at again. We can see here the first mistake was made by Ford. Ford appointed Stevens to replace Douglas way back in 75. He was anticipating a nice solid conservative. He got that wrong. Reagan appointed O'Connor. O'Connor was supposed to be another conservative, but she turned out to be a swing justice. Kennedy, and he again was that last minute replacement. Remember, Bork was rejected. Ginsburg withdrew, so he was really struggling, and he wound up with Kennedy. Kennedy, fantastic judge by all accounts, but probably a bit more progressive than Reagan and his conservative chums were hoping for. Next up, Bush 41, and he makes an error there, but then he has a chance to correct it. He doesn't make that error twice, and we see Thomas being appointed, and over here we can see that balance of power shifting, the balance, the progressive balance being chipped back one block at a time. And Bush 43 knocked it back another block there, and so we wind up at that 4-1-4 split that we talked about. Kennedy still, 40-60, progressive to conservative. And that is the Supreme Court that we have today. 4-1-4, well, probably sort of 4.9 to 4.1 or 4.6 to 4.4, whatever. But we're getting into semantics. It doesn't really matter. All you need to know is that Kennedy, as the swing justice, tends to swing more conservative than he does liberal. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that we have had a progressive majority for the larger part of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Again, I've been a little bit cavalier here. They don't really have a majority. That's down to a half. I hope you can see it's not one. So I've kind of fudged it there just to demonstrate that the Supreme Court, as it is balanced, but with a slight bias towards the conservative side. So maybe that's a bit extreme, not that much, but you get the general idea. I think it's not quite on the true. It's slightly biased, as opposed to being monumentally tipped towards the progressive, as it was there during the mid-80s, early 90s. What do we take from this? What's the critical point? Critical point number one is that the Supreme Court is not politically neutral. It only tends towards neutrality. And that assumption is based upon the White House changing hands on a fairly regular basis. And obviously presidents not making too many catastrophic errors. But the critical point number one, the Supreme Court is not politically neutral. It will at any time exhibit a bias towards the conservative or the progressive. And that's just the way it is. Tough. If you don't like it, well, don't go to America. So what about independence? Well, the judiciary's independence is, however, fiercely protected. This lays it out here. This is Article 3, Section 1. So you can't get rid of a judge just because you don't like what you're doing. Remember all of these mistakes. Remember all of these? There's nothing the president would have liked more than to correct these mistakes by firing these guys in the red boxes, but there was nothing they could do. The problematic judges of SOX, that is, Stevens, O'Connor, Kennedy, and Souter, were a massive embarrassment and indeed an obstacle to many presidents, but there's not much they could do about them. You cannot remove them except by impeachment process. Only one judge has been impeached. That was in 1805, and he survived it. So again, our key evidence there is SOX. These judges were appointed by mistake, and well, not by mistake. It just turned out that their appointment was an error, and there was nothing they could do about it. We see that here. Eisenhower, who appointed Earl Justice Warren to the Justice Earl Warren, sorry, to the bench and then to the chair, described that appointment as the biggest damn fool mistake he ever made. Now, the only other thing that I will mention about independence before we go on is this. The court can be petitioned by pressure groups. You can submit a curia, an amicus brief. Amicus curiae, friend of the court. You can submit a brief, but that doesn't mean that you're actually going to be influencing that judge. You cannot attempt to influence them any more than just by presenting an argument. You can't bribe them, you can't threaten them, you can't do anything else. And just because the court is subject to amicus briefs doesn't mean that their independence is being assaulted. The court can choose to ignore an amicus brief or read it. It's entirely up to them. And so the independence of the court is maintained. And this is very, very, very important. And this is a 15-mark question that pops up from time to time. And that's it. By crikey, I didn't think I was going to get through that in the time permitted, but I have. In fact, I've got a minute and a half left. But I won't waste any more of your valuable time. Rather, you go over that again, come up with your questions, bring them to me. I look forward to answering them. And trust me, this is where the fun really starts. Speak to you soon. Bye now.